When I was in Gombe, particularly, I felt very, very close to a great spiritual power. If we think of the Bible, it would be in which we live and move and have our being. And I felt this spiritual power in every living thing. We call it our soul. Well, if we have a soul, then that spark of energy is in chimpanzees. They have souls, even though most people wouldn't talk about it that way. And the trees, they have a soul too. They've got a spark of that divine energy. It was in Gombe that I began to really think about the spiritual nature of life on this planet. When you're out in nature, if you're just completely calm, you know, I was a bit scared when I met a leopard, I have to admit, but it didn't for a moment make me think, oh, I'm going to leave. No, because the leopard didn't do anything to me. I just felt nothing would happen to me because I was meant to be there. And I felt this about other times in my life. The most important part of being in the rainforest is the understanding of the interconnection, how every little species has a role to play. And I like to think of this tapestry of life in the forest. I think, okay, this little species disappears, a thread is removed from the tapestry, and then this species goes and another thread is removed. And if too many species go from this ecosystem, the whole ecosystem may collapse because the tapestry is in tatters, and we depend on healthy ecosystems. There's such magic out in the forest. And it just is a feeling of spirituality that this, you know, it's something so powerful and so much beyond what even the most scientific, brilliant brain could have created. This is my grandfather. I never met him, but he just looks wonderful. To me, he looks wonderful. I think it's very difficult to determine the different parts of who you are, where it came from. It's a mixture of genes and environment and experience, I think. So I was brought up in a very, very caring family. I had an amazing mother, supportive mother. And when I was very tiny, I loved animals. When I went to stay on a farm in the country, I was given the job of helping to collect the hen's eggs. Apparently, I began asking everyone, but where's the hole? Where does the egg come out of the hen? Because I couldn't see a hole like that. Well, nobody satisfied my curiosity. So I went into an empty hen house and waited. I waited at least 4 hours. I can still see the hen laying that egg. If I close my eyes, she's right there in front of me. And I don't know who was more excited, me or the hen. And so, it's the making of a little scientist, curiosity, asking questions, not getting the right answer, deciding to find out for yourself, making a mistake, not giving up and learning patience. It was all there in that little 4.5-year-old child. And a different kind of mother might have crushed that scientific curiosity. I might not have done what I've done. When I left the beloved forests of Gombe and the chimpanzees, because I realized that the forests were being destroyed and chimpanzee numbers were decreasing, I knew I had to do something. And somehow I was guided in a way to do what I did. It's very important that young people learn that you can't just care for the environment. You need to care for people too, because you can't separate them. As I speak now, in different parts of the world, there are young people. They've rolled up their sleeves and they're out there clearing litter, planting trees, raising money for good causes, volunteering in shelters, volunteering in soup kitchens, changing the attitude of their parents. So Roots and Shoots is hope. Hundreds and thousands, millions of young people, the roots and the shoots, can break through and make a better world. And here is my studio, from where I reach out to the world. Well, for me, I have never been as busy in my whole life. You know, when I first was grounded, as I call it, I happened, luckily, to be at home in Bournemouth. And I was really frustrated. I was angry because, you know, I was used to traveling 300 days a year around the world. And then I thought, well, there's no point being angry. I'm here, so we have to make the best of it. Since then, every single day, it's been Zooms and Skypes and podcasts and webinars and all these other things. I think the most important part about this is that I have been able to reach these millions more people in many more countries than I could possibly have reached if I was traveling. I just feel it was meant to be. You know, I just turned 87, so I'm now in my 88th year. So I don't know how much longer I have left. So it's good to be able to use these months when I'm still fighting fit, so to speak, to the best advantage I can. I'm not sure how my feeling of spirituality has guided my work, but it's really more a feeling of, this is what I'm meant to be doing. This is what I'm here for. My life has a meaning. I was a very shy child. All I wanted to do was go and live in the jungle and write books about animals. I didn't want anything else. I didn't even want to be a scientist. And then I had to give talks and things like that. But, you know, especially now I'm here where I grew up with the family. I mean, I'm still the same Jane I was. And I don't understand what's happened to, why do people listen? Why do thousands of people come to lectures? I don't know. The world is so full of magic and surprises. And I think when people say, oh, science can describe it all, you know, you don't need to go to any intelligence behind the universe. Science, we have all the answers. And after all, it's been proven that the universe began with the Big Bang. Well, yeah, I'm sure it did. But what created the Big Bang? You cannot say everything's explained because of the Big Bang. You've got to then say, now I want you to explain the Big Bang, and they can't. So I like to keep an open mind, and I like to think of magic, and I don't want us to find out all the answers. You know, and I love that little phrase in the Bible, now we see through a glass darkly, then face to face. So one day we will learn the answers, but not on this planet.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Heather Templeton Dill, president of the John Templeton Foundation, and I want to welcome you to tonight's event entitled Inspiration and Hope, Living a Life of Purpose. We are here to celebrate the 2021 Templeton Prize Laureate, Dr. Jane Goodall. On May 20, in 2021, we announced that the judges for the Templeton Prize had selected Dr. Goodall, but COVID prevented us from doing an event like this until now. We are so happy to be here, and we are delighted that you have joined us this evening to take part in a conversation with Jane. In addition to Dr. Goodall, I want to thank our special guests, including my colleague, Andrew Serazin, president of the Templeton World Charity Foundation, and Mike Ulica, president and COO of the National Geographic Society, Andrew and Mike have joined us to make a very special announcement later in tonight's program. And Christiane Amanpour, CNN's chief international anchor, who will host a conversation with Jane. And we welcome your participation in Christiane's conversation with Jane. Please take a moment and find the QR code in your program this evening. We ask that you submit questions for Jane using that QR code, and we ask that you submit those questions by 8 o'clock. The Templeton Prize, valued at £1.1 million, is one of the world's largest annual individual awards. The Templeton Prize was established 50 years ago by my grandfather, the investor, Sir John Templeton. He created the prize at a time when the contributions of religion and spirituality were not being widely recognized nor celebrated. Sir John spoke often about the marvelous new developments in religious belief and practice. The Nobel Prizes honored those who made achievements in sciences, in peace building, and in literature. Sir John wanted to identify spiritual visionaries. He also believed that scientific research would help us understand human purpose. And so he created a prize to recognize individuals who harness the power of the sciences to explore the deepest questions of the universe and humankind's place and purpose within it. Templeton Prize laureates include Mother Teresa, who received the first award in 1973, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, and Dame Cicely Saunders, who founded the hospice movement that is now a standard of medical care. In the last 10 years, the prize has been given to religious leaders for the work they have done to bridge the best in science with spiritual practices. The Dalai Lama received the Templeton Prize in 2012 because he sought to understand meditation in light of cutting-edge neuroscience. Archbishop Desmond Tutu was given the prize in 2013 because he leveraged research on forgiveness in his work to heal conflicts. And the Templeton Prize has also recognized scientists whose work and writing goes beyond empirical research to questions about what it means to be human. Dr. Francis Collins, the 2020 Templeton Prize laureate and a great friend to Jane, received the Templeton Prize because he helped people of faith understand how science enlivens one's religious beliefs and practices. Dr. Jane Goodall is another renowned scientist. The world knows her primarily for her work with chimpanzees and her zeal to save Earth from further environmental degradation. The Templeton Prize celebrates those contributions, and in particular, the spiritual curiosity which, by her own account, both motivated and fueled her work throughout her life. She has described the spiritual and scientific ways of understanding as windows through which we view the world. Science offers one window, polished by a succession of brilliant minds. But there are other windows which offer insight from our hearts and souls, and through which the founders of the world's religions and spiritual traditions have found meaning and purpose. She has shown that we humans are not separate from, but are deeply part of the animal kingdom, and that this fact gives humanity a duty and a purpose to care for all life on Earth. In her best-selling memoir, Reason for Hope, she reveals the way in which the forests of Gombe, as well as her personal experiences of love and loss, elicited an awareness of a divine presence in the world. I think we all know that time in nature fills us with a sense of something bigger than ourselves. And in that sense, it is not surprising that Dr. Goodall's scientific curiosity would spill over into spiritual curiosity. By giving Dr. Goodall the Templeton Prize, we have been able to spotlight her spiritual insights, born through the experience of doing science in the natural world and of finding joy, knowing sorrow, and learning to carry on no matter what. If you have not read Reason for Hope, you should, and then I encourage you to purchase her new book, A Book of Hope, a survival guide for an endangered planet, and read that too. Dr. Goodall's accomplishments go hand in hand with a deep spiritual awareness that shaped how she interacted with chimpanzees and then animates her advocacy work today. That spiritual conviction has been a source of inspiration to others, and tonight, I am sure, Dr. Goodall's spirit will inspire all of us as we seek to live purposeful lives focused on serving others. Please join me now in welcoming the 51st winner of the Templeton Prize, Dr. Jane Goodall. Jane, it is an honor to finally meet you in person and to be able to celebrate you this evening. Today is also a special day because we have two items we would like to present to you as part of the Templeton Prize Medallion and a scroll. So we'll take 2 steps back so I can give these little items to you.
Oh, that's very smart. Ooh. Are you going to anoint me?
I am. First, I'm going to tell you what I will anoint you with. This is the Templeton Prize Medallion, and it includes an image of the Tree of Life. We have used this image for many years to represent the depth and the breadth of the meaning of the Templeton Prize. The Templeton Prize is given to those who recognize and talk about the spiritual dimension of human life, which my grandfather, Sir John Templeton, thought was essential to human flourishing. I would like to now place this on your neck.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I don't know what to do.
I also want to present you with this scroll, which is crafted by hand and includes a number of images that represent your life and your work. This leaf is an image of the beech tree, where you spent so much time as a young girl thinking about and watching the world around you. The egg reminds us of your first scientific discovery, watching a chicken lay an egg. We have included the logo for the Jane Goodall Institute and for your Roots and Shoots program. And this is David Graybeard.
Actually, it's Flo.
Oh, that's Flo. Oh, my goodness. Well, thank
Flo,
you.
Flo is just as important.
Well, we should have
I've got
both
her
of
in
them.
my notes, Flo.
Well, then it's appropriate that
Yes,
that's
it
Flo,
is.
so my notes were incorrect. But this is a scroll that represents the work you have done and the powerful impact you continue to have on the world today. Congratulations, Jane.
Well, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to invite you to say a few words.
Well, good evening, everybody. And what an honor this is. And I think the main reason I feel so honored is because of the people who've been awarded the Templeton Prize before. And the last one, of course, was Francis Collins, who was head of NIH for many years, helped to get chimpanzees out of medical research into sanctuaries, and guided the NIH through the worst of the pandemic. And so that really makes me feel kind of very humble too. But also, the prize comes very generously endowed. And this money for all the different projects that the Jane Goodall Institute is working on, some of which I think you've heard about already, although I couldn't hear what was being said. So it's really going to help start Roots and Shoots groups, help people who are struggling with the new Jane Goodall Institute, to hire people who can help them to raise their own funds, because every JGI needs to be independent. So for all these reasons, this is a very great honor, and I wish that your father was around so I could thank him in person. But maybe he's listening. I bet he is. Yes, I'm sure my mother is as well. So with the few remarks that I am to make, first of all, I think a lot of what I've done is due to my amazing mother. I had a wonderful childhood growing up in Bournemouth in the UK. There was no television back then. And so I had books, but I had outside. We have a lovely garden where the beech tree is, whose leaf is on that scroll. And during the pandemic, when I've been in Bournemouth, in the old family home, 3 people from that home are here tonight in the front row, my sister, my niece, and one of my grandsons. And I've sat every day for half an hour about under beech tree, having my little lunch, joined by a robin and a blackbird. So beech is still playing a very important role in my life. But I had this mother who supported this crazy dream. I got the dream because I told you I was surrounded by books, and I was 10 years old when I met Tarzan of the Apes. You know, the original book. No, there wasn't a television back then. And I fell passionately in love with Tarzan, very jealous because he married the wrong Jane, and determined that I would go to Africa when I grew up, live with wild animals, and write books about them. Jane, why don't you dream about something you can achieve? You won't get to Africa. The war was still raging, World War II, and Africa's full of danger. Don't know anything about it, and you're just a girl. But not my mother. She said, if you really want to do something like this, you're going to have to work really hard, take advantage of every opportunity, and if you don't give up, you'll find a way. And she was right, and I did. But, you know, a different kind of mother and a different kind of family might have led to my being a very different kind of person. My grandfather, my mother's father, was a congregational minister. So I grew up in a Christian family. I'm really sad I never met him. He sounds an absolutely wonderful person. He was highly intelligent. He got a scholarship to Oxford. He got another one to some other British university, I can't remember which. And then he got a scholarship to Yale in America. And when he was there to earn some money while he worked for his degree, he went around different churches giving talks, giving sermons for ministers who were having their vacation. Well, he went from church to church to church on a pony that he called Boots. And when we found his diaries, we thought we'll learn so much about, you know, America at that time, but it was all about Boots. Boots needs a new shoe, bought some boots for Oates, but Oates for Boots. Anyway, the amazing thing is that I was giving a lecture, and I think it was in Yale. But anyway, the hall that they had booked for me got too full. There were too many people who wanted to come. So they moved it into the congregational church. So I gave a talk from the very pulpit where my grandfather had preached. And I just thought that was just quite amazing. So I wish I'd met him, but he died before I was born. My mother was wise too, in that she said, well, you grew up in a Christian family, you're a Christian, but you might have been born in Iran, or you might have been born in India, or you might have been born in some other part of the world, and then you might have been a Muslim or a Buddhist or a Jain or whatever. But there can only be one God. So she had wisdom in very many ways, and she made a very major difference to my life and to me. I think you all know, and I'm sure you saw it in the film, that I did get to Africa. And when I got to Africa, I was lucky enough to hear about and then meet the famous paleoanthropologist, Dr. Louis Leakey. And he was curator of the Natural History Museum. I went to see him because somebody said, if you're interested in animals, you should meet Louis Leakey. I'd gone, by the way, just to have a holiday with a school friend whose family had moved out to Kenya. And Leakey took me all around. He asked me questions about many of the displayed animals. And because I'd spent hours and hours in the Natural History Museum right here, I'd learned everything I could about African animals, and so I could answer many of his questions. He took me on a safari to Olduvai Gorge, where I met lions and rhinos and all the throngs of animals that roamed the plains back then. It cuts through the Serengeti National Park. And I think Leakey was impressed at how I reacted when I met a rhino face to face, when I met a young male lion who followed me, I would say, about twice the distance of this space. And he was just curious. I don't suppose he'd ever seen a white woman before. And anyway, I think Leakey was impressed that I didn't panic, and he says I did the right thing, because that's when he asked if I'd like to study chimpanzees in Tanzania. Interestingly, one of the reasons he told me later that he wanted me to do the study was because I had not been to university. I didn't have a degree, we couldn't afford it, but I'd learned from nature, hours and hours out in nature. And he thought perhaps because I was a woman, I might have more inborn patience, because if you look through human evolution, the woman's job was mainly to have children and look after a family. And I'm sure many of you know, you need to be patient to be a good mother. So anyhow, he chose me for these reasons. And of course, I learned so much from the chimpanzees, and many of you know many of the things that I learned, but how lucky I was. I was the very first person to study them in the wild. One man had attempted in 1800 and something, and for some bizarre reason he wanted to learn about chimp behavior, and he found a fig tree where the locals said, this is where the chimps come to feed. So he had a cage built, and he put it by the tree, and for some bizarre reason, he went in to hope the chimps would come, naked, but smeared with baboon dung. There are strange people in this world. He didn't see a chimpanzee. Anyway, so it took four months before the chimpanzees began to accept me. And the first one was David Greybeard, and the story of how he taught me that chimpanzees can use and make tools is now known everywhere. And it was old Flo, who's depicted on that scroll, who taught me so much about chimpanzee mothers. And I was able to watch the development of her son Flint almost daily, because in those days we were feeding bananas, which we don't do anymore. We now know that chimpanzees can catch our diseases, and we can catch theirs, and field study methods have changed. But of course, when I went into the field, there was basically nobody out studying anything. So it was all new, and I feel giving the bananas was a little bit like the early missionaries who would put out beads and things for the savages, I think they called them back then. Anyway, whatever. So chimpanzees share 98.6% of our DNA. They're like us in so many ways in their behavior. And the more like us that different people began to notice, the more people tried to find some way of insisting that humans were unique and separate. And so what about culture? Yes, chimpanzees have culture, different tool-using behaviors in different parts of Africa. And now we know many animals have culture. Oh, well, they tried various other things. Empathy, yes, chimps have empathy. Religion. That must make us different. Maybe, but in Gombe, there are some very beautiful waterfalls that come crashing down onto the rocks. And this one has, over the eons, has carved itself a niche in the rock. And as you get near, you can feel the wind coming from the air that's displaced by the falling water. You can hear the thundering as it drops 80 foot onto the shallow riverbed. And sometimes the chimpanzees, as they approach, the hair will start to stand on end with excitement. And when they get there, they may start this slow display, bending down, picking up rocks, throwing them ahead, sometimes giving low calls. And at the end of a display like this, which may last 10 minutes, when they may stamp upright through the water, throwing these rocks, they may climb up vines beside the waterfall, push out into the spray. And at the end, if you're lucky enough to be able to watch their eyes, I've seen them sit on rocks, and I've seen their eyes look up where the waterfall starts and follow it down and watch it as it goes away. What is this stuff that's always coming, always going, but always here? And isn't that, if they had language, and that really is spoken language, is the one thing that has made so much possible for us, because we can talk about the past, we can plan for the future, we can teach about things that people have never seen. And so chimps don't have that ability. But if they did, might they not be sitting there wondering, what is this? And if they could talk about what they feel to each other, couldn't that have led to one of the early animistic human religions? We don't know, but it's possible. So they're all the time learning new things about the chimpanzees. And it was really exciting, and building up a research station. And one of the very first people to come to that research station is sitting right here in the front row, Dr. Anthony Collins, Tony, or Anton as he's known, and he's still working at Gombe. And he heads up the baboon research, but he knows just as much about the chimpanzees. So much long term. You know, I just turned 88, and that's a pretty long life to look back over. And what an amazing life it's been, and how incredibly lucky. I, at one time, thought I would stay at Gombe forever. But then at a conference in '86, I learned how forests were disappearing across Africa, chimp numbers were decreasing. And I just felt at the end of that conference that I had to try and do something about it. I learned about chimps in medical research, our closest relatives in 5-foot by 5-foot cages, alone, surrounded by steel bars. It was one of the most heartbreaking things I ever had to do, to go into those labs and look into their eyes. So, and it was Francis Collins, as I mentioned, who helped to end that NIH chimp research after he took over as director. But I didn't know what to do back then. I just knew I had to do something. So I got together a bit of money and went to 6 of the African countries where by then there were chimp studies. And I learned a lot about what was happening to the chimps, the bushmeat trade, being mothers shot to get babies to sell for entertainment, circuses, pets, and so on. And also many chimps captured in wire snares set by hunters. But I also learned about the plight of so many of the African people living in and around chimpanzee habitat, the crippling poverty, the lack of good health and education facilities, the degradation of the land as populations grew. And it came to a head when I flew over the tiny Gombe National Park, where we're still doing the studies, 62 years now later. And it had been, when I began in 1960, part of the equatorial forest belt that stretched right across Africa. But by the late 1980s, I looked down from a plane at this little island of forest surrounded by bare hills. More people living there than the land could support, too poor to buy food elsewhere, struggling to survive. And that's when the Jane Goodall Institute began our Take Care, or Tukari program, as we call it. And there's going to be a book about it with stories of how people's lives have changed. But we didn't go into the villages around Gombe, 12 of them, as a bunch of arrogant white people. Oh, we know what to do and we're going to help you. The man who helped start it, George Strunden, he picked a team of local Tanzanians. And they didn't even have a PhD. They weren't a threat to any of the villagers. But what they did was go in and sit and listen and ask the people, what do you think JGI can do for you? And that's where we started. I don't have time to go into this, but it's very holistic. It deals with everything from restoring fertility to overused farmland, to providing scholarships, to give girls a chance of secondary education and family planning, and almost everything you can think of. And the people have now become our partners in conservation because they understand that protecting the natural world, protecting the forest, isn't just for wildlife, it's also for their own future. And they volunteered to become forest monitors. They've learned to use smartphones to monitor the health of their village forest reserves, now at 104 villages throughout Chimp Range. And the same program, or similar, in 6 other African countries where we work with chimpanzees. Costing a lot of money. And I began traveling around the world in the 80s, partly to try and raise money, mainly, for me anyway, to raise awareness about what was going on. And I kept meeting young people, even back then, even in the late 80s, who seemed to have lost hope. And they were either angry, or they were depressed, or mostly just didn't seem to care. And when I talked to them, they all said more or less the same. Well, you have compromised our future, and there's nothing we can do about it. Well, we have compromised their future. We've, in fact, been stealing their future probably since the Industrial Revolution or even the Agricultural Revolution. But I didn't agree when they said there's nothing that can be done. So that began our Roots and Shoots program, which is now in 65 countries and growing. And it's a program which is special because, one, the children themselves, or the students, I should say, choose their own projects, 3 projects, one to help people, one to help animals, one to help the environment, because it's all interrelated. You learn that in the forest. And it's got members now from kindergarten, university, everything in between, with more and more adults now forming groups. And I'm telling you, it's changing the world, because when young people understand the problems, when we listen to them, when we empower them to take action, to choose what they want to do without telling them what they have to do, they just become so animated, so passionate, so determined. They're changing the world as we speak. So Roots and Shoots is one of the things that I'm really proud of, and I think the Templeton Prize also honors the Roots and Shoots as well as Takari. And so people are saying to me now, do you have hope? How can you have hope? And I have to say that the ghastly situation in Ukraine is one thing that is so depressing. Living through World War II, I thought it can never happen again. Everybody was saying, you know, things like the Holocaust can't happen again. They've been happening ever since. And what's happening now in Ukraine is so shocking. However, we did get through World War II. Churchill was able to inspire hope in the British people. We will not be defeated. And eventually he got Roosevelt into the war, and we were not defeated. The rest of Europe was. So that's one sort of hope, that the same thing might happen in Ukraine. And both this president and his predecessor quoted Churchill's famous speech about, we will fight them on the beaches, we'll fight them in the woods, we'll fight them in the streets. And he turned aside to a friend and said, and we'll fight them with the ends of broken bottles, because that's all we bloody got. We weren't prepared for war. And so Ukraine, well, we just have to keep our fingers crossed and hope for miracles. But for the rest of it, there's just 4 reasons for hope. One is the power of young people. Other is the resilience of nature. There aren't any bare hills around Gombe anymore. Animal species on the brink of extinction can be given another chance. Then there's this amazing brain, this thing that does make us different from other animals. If only we'd always, and did always, use it wisely. But people are now beginning to think of new technologies that will help us live in greater harmony with nature, like solar power as one example. People are beginning to think about how they in their own lives can leave a lighter ecological footprint, because awareness is growing. And then finally, there's the indomitable spirit, the people who tackle seemingly impossible projects and so often succeed. So those are my reasons for hope. And of course, if we lose hope, we're doomed. And I think of it now as though the human species is at the mouth of a very long and very dark tunnel. Right at the end is a little star shining, hope. But it's no point sitting at the mouth of the tunnel and hoping that star will come to us. Hope is about action. We've got to gird our loins, as the Bible nobly says, and we've got to crawl under, climb over, work our way around all the obstacles that lie between us and that star, and they are many. There's climate change, there's human population growth, there's loss of biodiversity, there's poverty. You can go on and name all these problems. But if we start moving through that tunnel with our loins girded, reaching out to take others with us, there are people who can solve all these different problems or work on solving them. And that's how we'll get to hope, by working together, by collaborating, by stopping thinking in silos. And so, again, thank you for awarding me this prize. But you know, it's not really mine. Think of the people who've helped me on my way. I couldn't have done any of this without them, starting with my mother and my family, my dog Rusty, who taught me animals are sentient beings, Flo, David Greybeard, then there's the research team at Gombe and in the other countries where we work, and all the people of the Jane Goodall Institute, many here this evening. I don't know where you all are. And one very special one who's been with me for 30 years, helped start Roots and Shoots, is Mary Lewis, also in the front row over here, right at the end. So I really want to say, Heather, that this, I'm not giving it away, it's too precious, but I'm sharing it with all the people around the world who are helping to make this a better world for tomorrow. Thank you.
So it's a great pleasure for me to talk to you again, and also to meet you, Heather Templeton, and to talk to you about this incredible award that your family has raised. Can I just ask you, Jane, first? You've given the audience, you know, a sort of a sketch of your life, and we've talked quite a lot on CNN about your origins, what your mother did for you, what Africa did for you, how you came to be this remarkable scientist without even a university degree to start off with. And it is a huge source of hope and inspiration, particularly probably to many young people in the audience. And I just wanted to ask you, after these 2 years, and we're still sort of going through it, but we're emerging, of COVID, the pandemic, lockdown, are you hopeful that everything we've been thinking, seeing, living in these 2 years, where we've had time to think and appreciate nature, that will really sink more into people's reality? Are you hopeful about your part of the world after this lockdown?
Well, I think it's different for different people, you know, and I know at the beginning of the pandemic when all the traffic was shut down, right, people were saying, I heard birds for the first time, I didn't realize they were here. And I think in some countries, think of places like Mumbai or you know, heavily polluted areas like London used to be, that for the first time they could see stars shining brightly and not through a haze of you know, pollution. But then sadly I think, you know, reality crept in, people lost their jobs. The pandemic brought out courage in so many people, the care, social workers and people who delivered food and walked dogs to the elderly, the doctors and nurses and healthcare workers. I mean, amazing. Also brought out a lot of selfishness, and there was looting and things like that. And poverty, far more homeless people. So I think an awareness has grown of the fact that climate change is due to our disrespect of nature. And the pandemic is due to our disrespect of animals, because we've created conditions that make it relatively easy for a pathogen like a virus to jump from an animal to a person.
At least we're more sensitized now, at the very least. Heather, I wanted to ask you about your grandfather. It's your grandfather,
It is
right?
my grandfather, yes.
And he did something pretty amazing by setting up this award. But I understood that he was quite a pioneer, and it was often sort of unthought of causes, and perhaps some kind of unpopular causes that others hadn't celebrated or rewarded. Tell me about what inspired him to do this kind of award.
Well, at the time, in the early 1970s, he was serving on 2 different Christian organizations, and he was quite impressed with the people he met who were doing remarkable things around the world, some of them creating new groups or new projects and new ways of practicing religious belief. And he wanted to recognize those individuals. He looked at Alfred Nobel and the prizes he had set up and noted that the Nobel Prizes recognize all other domains of human existence except for religious belief and practice. He was also partially concerned that people were losing interest in religion and that there wasn't enough enthusiasm for the wonderful things that people of faith can contribute to the world. So he thought a prize would bring enthusiasm to that domain of human existence. And when he started the prize, even though his background is Christian, he wanted to make sure that the prize celebrated faith traditions all around the world.
And as you mentioned, the Dalai Lama, Mother Teresa, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, just so many diverse winners. But you've talked, I think it's 1.1 million pounds.
Correct.
That's a lot of money, and I know you've done amazing fundraising, Jane, around the world, obviously. Your presence just galvanizes people, and so does your story. Does the prize come with specific, do you have to use it for a specific purpose, the money? I mean, any strings attached?
There are no strings attached.
Okay.
So the money goes to the laureate. My grandfather was very specific about that they could use the money as they saw fit.
And what will you see fit to do? You talked just now about roots and shoots, and is it mostly that you want to fund?
It will help start up new groups of roots and shoots, give little tiny, if you give a little tiny grant to a child, can be a young child, because they've done something special and they seem to have leadership qualities. It's changed lives. It's got young people who say, that changed my life, and now I'm doing a degree in whatever it is. And so it's going to make such a difference to many, many people. I wish our grandfathers could have met. Wouldn't that have been fun? They were both very special.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to be in this natural history museum. I hadn't realized, Jane, that this is where you had come to bone up and study up before you went to Africa for the first time. And it's just such a legacy. It's so incredible to be here. I would be remiss. I do actually have some questions from the audience, which we're going to ask in a moment. So I'm not going to step all over these. But I would be very remiss if I didn't ask you about this very important personage that you seem to be carrying around a lot.
Mr. H was given to me, Mary will correct me, but anyway, I think it was 86, 87 years ago. And don't dare say anything, Mary, about that. And it was given to me by a man called Gary Horn, who went blind at 21 in the US Marines. And when he was learning to live in this new dark world, for some bizarre reason, he decided he wanted to be a magician. So everybody said, Gary, you can't be a magician if you can't see. He said, well, I can try. The children don't know he's blind. I've watched him. And at the end of his show, he'll say, well, if something goes wrong in your life, because you never know, don't give up. There's always a way forward. And so he does skydiving, cross-country skiing. He's been scuba diving with sharks. He taught himself to paint. But anyway, he thought he was giving me a stuffed chimp for my birthday, and I made him hold the tail. Gary, chimps don't have tails. He said, never mind, take him with you everywhere, and you know I'm with you in the spirit. So he's an example of that indomitable spirit I was talking about. And he's very famous.
Well, yeah. We needed to explain him. You know, when I was at boarding school here in the UK, I was at a convent, in fact, and my biology teacher had one of your books, one of the early books, very early books, and I never ever thought that I'd get to meet you, interview you, discuss, you know, these incredible, important issues, and get these incredible awards. But I just want to know whether, you just told everybody, so I'm not, you know, breaching a secret, you've turned 88. Does the idea of your discoveries, no matter how much you talk about them and how many years, you know, since have passed, do they still give you just that jolt of excitement and pleasure and just gee whiz?
New discoveries, absolutely, and there's so much to discover.
No. Do you remember what you discovered about the chimpanzee, which was groundbreaking, what you discovered?
Oh, yeah, but we're still making groundbreaking discoveries today. So, you know, I mean, and I think one of the, all right, I'm not properly answering your question.
It's okay.
But to me, what's really exciting is that we'll never know everything. I mean, we know an awful lot more. I understood David Attenborough's here somewhere, and people have learned so much from your television programs, David. It's amazing. But there's still so much more to learn. And I tell students, this is perhaps the most exciting time for young people learning about animal behavior, because science will now accept the fact animals have personalities, minds, and emotions, which I couldn't have studied because they didn't exist. It was a difference, I was told, between us, humans, and all the other animals, and it was a difference of kind. It was a sharp line.
And Heather, look, it's not a secret. You're American?
Correct.
The United States of America, at least a great part of it, does not value the idea of nature and climate. You know, there's a big controversy over climate change. I've spoken to many in the religious community, whether evangelical or otherwise, about the struggle to convince, you know, their people that actually our world, our earth, our nature, our animals are a religious heritage and a religious gift as well. How do you feel about that?
Well, sometimes I think those who might look askance at the challenges that climate change present have the loudest voice. But I would say there are many, many religious people who use the concept of creation care. And they say, look, we believe in a God who created all of this, and he gave it to us to steward. And so there are many who are very motivated by that. And that's a growing number of people. And I know more and more young people who, maybe it's through a Roots and Shoots program or other means, see a way of living out their faith is caring for the creation and doing something about the world we've been given.
And it is becoming in the United States and certainly in Europe, the Green Party is becoming a very powerful political movement now for young people.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just that gives you hope in terms of the prize, the award, the spirituality?
I think people realize that there are ways we can create or care for and preserve what we have. And even if you look at it in that way, that it's about preserving what we have today so that we can give it as a gift to future generations.
What would your grandfather have thought of, what would he have said had he known that Jane Goodall was going to get this?
Well, he would have known about Jane Goodall, that's for sure. And he would have really been inspired by her book, Reason for Hope, which is a beautiful story of your life, Jane, and the way in which your background came through in the work, in the research that you did, and particularly your sense that God is active and alive all throughout creation. He would have been very inspired by that.
You were talking about the 4 reasons for hope. You outlined them. You're 88, you've seen everything. What gives you a sense of awe still?
Oh, I mean, I get a sense of awe in 2 different ways. One, when I look back through history and I see people going way, way back in the old days. Galileo, how did he know what he learned about the stars? Didn't have any of the modern equipment. I mean, this human brain, it's amazing. I'm filled with awe when I look at what some people do, what some people are planning, what some people are thinking. But there's another feeling of awe too, and that's, you know, somebody the other day asked me, what's your next adventure going to be? Well, when you're 88, I'm not going to do some of the things I used to want to do, like parts of Papua New Guinea. I was dying to go there, but I won't do it now. But I thought for a bit, and I said, there were about 10,000 people in the audience. I said, my next great adventure will be dying. And there was a kind of hush, and then a few titters. And I said, well, look, when you die, there's either nothing, in which case it doesn't matter, you're gone, and you won't care that you didn't discover anything. Or, as I think, there's something. And then can you think of a greater adventure than discovering what that something is? And of course, these near-death experiences, people who come back from being basically physically declared dead, give you a little glimpse as to what that something might be.
Well, we're going to stop there for a moment before I go to audience questions. I want to introduce Andrew Serazin. He's the president of the Templeton World Charity Foundation. He's a Rhodes Scholar, receiving his doctorate from the University of Oxford for his work on developing new drugs and vaccines against malaria. And also Michael Ulica, president and chief operating officer of the National Geographic Society, where he implements the 134-year-old institution's global strategy. And you have some exciting news.
Exciting news, Christiane. Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. I'm Andrew Serazin, president of the Templeton World Charity Foundation. And this night is so special for me, being here at the Natural History Museum in London, this cathedral of nature, and honoring such a special guest, Dr. Jane Goodall, really in a manner that echoes the great contributions of other female scientists in history, like Mary Anning, who discovered the first ichthyosaur over 200 years ago when she was 12 years old. But in addition to the support of the Templeton Prize, Templeton World Charity Foundation supports a diverse group of researchers to discover new knowledge, create new tools, and launch new innovations that make a lasting impact on human flourishing. And so for us, flourishing requires listening. It requires awe and wonder. It requires humility. It requires gratitude and the commitment to truth. And so Dr. Jane Goodall embodies all of these virtues. Hers is a legacy that we aim to amplify in the next generation of scientists, just as Louis Leakey mentored Jane and Diane Fossey and Birute Galdikas. And so it's an understatement for us to say that Jane continues to be an inspiration for many around the world. Her impact, specifically in the field of ethology and natural history, including so many scholars that we support, knows no bounds. Inspired by her field studies showing that tool use in primates was possible, researchers have made many, many other astonishing discoveries, such as self-identity in dolphins, the rudiments of memory in plants, or play in birds. But moreover, this work helps us expand outward from our limited, small human perspective to find other ways of knowing and flourishing that will in turn inform our own lives. Importantly, these observations also add a sense of urgency and importance to the devastating loss of biodiversity on our planet. So tonight, I'm so thrilled to announce that the Templeton World Charity Foundation has awarded a $2.7 million grant to the National Geographic Society to find and fund 3 rising scientists to follow in Jane's very large footsteps. This program will support researchers working in wild places or on land or sea, far from the comfort of the laboratory. The initial program will run 4 years and have the potential to expand up to 10 years of support. And like Dr. Goodall herself, these fellows will be passionate about their research, but eager to share that research with others around the world, and also model the very important character strengths of humility and patience and trust and giving that you've heard about tonight. And so for the National Geographic, We're so grateful to partner with you. You have such a rich and storied history, including supporting Dr. Goodall over 60 years ago. But also today, you're really at the forefront of discovery and innovation with a global reach. And so the Society is such a perfect partner for us in this endeavor. Mike, thank you for joining us, and we really look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Andrew, and I am just so honored and thrilled to be here tonight. On behalf of the National Geographic Society, I want to thank the Templeton World Charity Foundation for the generous grant and share how excited we are to identify and fund the next 3 explorers who will follow in Dr. Jane Goodall's footsteps. What amazing shoes those are to fill, as we've heard tonight. The Society has a rich history with Jane that spans 60 years. We first funded Jane in the early 1960s, supporting her early work in Gombe. Today, we are immensely proud and consider her work some of the greatest we've ever supported, not only for her scientific achievements, but for the millions of people she has touched and inspired along the way. And we are committed to building on her legacy. As a global nonprofit, the National Geographic Society invests and supports change makers just like Jane. Cutting-edge scientists, conservationists, educators, technologists, innovators in storytelling, a global community of National Geographic explorers. Inspired by Jane's transforming research with chimpanzees, we hope to identify 3 individuals who possess the same scientific rigor, deep passion for discovering the secrets of nature, and desire to engage and inspire through storytelling. By combining the vision, resources, and reach of our 2 organizations, we are positioned to find the explorers who can uncover knowledge about the natural world, the invaluable insights on what it means to be human, as we build powerful stories to engage global communities and audiences. This opportunity exemplifies the kind of role that we at the Society, alongside our partners at the Templeton Foundation, can play in this world. I know it is just the beginning of a wonderful partnership between our organizations. And of course, we would not be here tonight without Jane and her vision. I want to congratulate her on this prestigious award, echo my heartfelt thanks to Jane for being here today and for inspiring so many for so many years. Thank you.
So, Mike, we're so grateful for the opportunity to extend the impact of the 2021 Templeton Prize with such an amazing partnership. Just in closing, although we aim to support such a few number of researchers directly through this award, it's our sincere hope that these new discoveries will inspire thousands around the world, and perhaps some of you sitting here tonight. It is only through such collaborations that we can accelerate a future where all of humanity and the planet flourishes. And so with that, we'd love to hear your questions, and so back over to you, Christiane.
Thank you both very much. Wonderful news, huh? Very exciting for some young people who are going to get to be able to try to do what you do. So, Jane, because of what we were just discussing, I chose this question first. Again, from the audience. Do you believe that animals have souls?
We humans, with our language, we give names to everything. And I was actually thinking the other day, when you name something, in a way, you belittle it. I was landed the other day at Gombe by the most glorious fly. It had the most incredible colors. It's a fly. And I thought, it's a fly, but when you say it's a fly, it's just a fly. It's a magic, extraordinary little being. So we, with our love of naming everything, this spiritual, whatever it is that I believe we have, we label it a soul. I think there's a little spark of that eternal power, God or whatever, that's in every living being. If we have souls, animals have souls. Whoever asked that, yes, animals do have souls if you believe we have souls.
Do you feel the same way about spiders?
Yes, absolutely.
What wisdom have you gained from your study? Again, this is what somebody in the audience wants to know. From your observation of primates. Not what you've discovered, but the wisdom.
Well, I suppose the wisdom is learning more about ourselves. Because, you know, as I've already said, at one time it was thought we were totally separate. Of course, long before that, Darwin knew that that wasn't true, but Darwin was scoffed and scorned. He was a prophet before his time. But, you know, it's wisdom when you can sit back and think, who are we? Where did we come from? Why are we here? That's wisdom. What are we using our life for? Why have we been given this life? That's sort of wisdom.
And this is from me now, because just to follow up. Again, I remember when we discussed, and you alluded to it, when you went as a very young girl on a holiday, and you met Mr. Leakey, Professor Leakey, and he took you into his orbit and gave you this gift that you then ran with. You were really young, and you were sitting there for hours writing and observing. What was going through your head at that time? Did you realize the magnitude of what this might lead to, the wisdom that you would learn? Or was it just sort of in the moment happening?
When you're young, you don't think like that. Of course it was, I've got to learn about the chimps, because I want to, desperately want to. Although when I went to Africa, it was with a desire to study any animal in the wild. A mouse would have done, if I could be out in the wild, you know. Instead of which I'm offered the creature, but it's just more fascinating than anything except ourselves, I think, because they're so like us. And so, but back then, all I thought about was, I mustn't let Louis Leakey down. I must find out about the chimps. And that was it.
And you're a woman, and you've obviously inspired a lot of girls as well as a lot of boys, a lot of men and women. I'm fascinated by what Leakey said to you, that he would much prefer to have you as a non-university student, and no preconceived notions, and probably as a woman as well, with the patients. When you have done your work, does the idea of being a woman at all play into, do you consider the particular qualities that women may have? I mean, it's kind of a dumb question, because obviously some of the greatest anthropologists have been men as well, clearly. But what were some of those women qualities that you've embraced maybe going forward?
Well, I suppose what I've said, that we needed to be patient. Right. We needed to be very aware. I mean, you know, there you are, and you've got a family, you've got some little children, and you find that father is in a really bad mood, then it's really important to keep the children away. So you're looking out all the time for things that are going on in the world around you, to keep peace in the family, to make things smooth and easier for you. But you know, my favorite little story, or one of them anyway, when it comes to male, female, we all have male and female traits in us. Some have more than others, so they become male or they become female. But there's a tribe in one of the Latin American countries, I think it's Colombia, not totally sure. And I met the chief, and he said, Jane, he said, you know, we think of our tribe as like an eagle, and one wing is male and the other wing is female. And only when the wings are equal will our tribe fly high.
What a wise chief.
I love that.
It's about equal. You're absolutely right.
And we're getting there. I mean, women's, you know, the status of women, the role of women, the way women are regarded has climbed up. It can go a little bit too far sometimes, I think. I've met it. But basically, we're getting more balanced, aren't we?
Yeah.
Did you think?
And the nurturing quality, like you know, the caring for creation and nature. Audience wants to know, what person or people have you found to be spiritual role models and inspirations?
Well, I don't really want to go into a list like that, because it's it's too difficult and there are too many people. But you know, I have to say one person that I really, truly admire is Muhammad Yunus, who created the Grameen Bank because of what that has done for women. He invited me to Bangladesh, and I met women who before, they'd never had even a penny in their hand. And they told me, you know, when we took that first loan into our hand was shaking so much we could hardly hold it. And then they told me how their lives had changed, and they were crying. And that's one of our things that we have in our Dakari program. And the reason it's so good to have a loan rather than just money thrown at you is because when you've worked and you pay it back, you're proud because I earned it, it's mine, it's my project, I did it. And then they can ask for a larger loan if they want.
And I love Professor Yunus, who I've had the pleasure of interviewing as well, he says, I mean, this is not a charity. These women who we loan to are 100% responsible in terms of paying back. There's never, I mean, he's maybe one or two defaults in his experience with Grameen. It's really a galvanizing opportunity.
No, it's completely, it changes lives too, you know. But you know, the reason I don't want to go into all the other people is that so many of them, nobody would know their names. They're unknown, they're just out there, they're just doing incredible things, they're very inspirational. And they're all around us.
But
I mean,
great.
and you know, this indomitable spirit I spoke about, every single one of you out there, you have that same indomitable spirit. And like I say, sometimes that it needs a disaster to bring it out of people. But we could all grow it. It's there. We're all given it.
What is your experience of grief and transition in your work?
Transition? Not sure what you mean by transition,
Well,
but
I guess
grief.
from life to death, death to life.
Oh, well, grief, you know, I witness grief in the chimpanzee world, and it's very, very real. And when old Flo died, her son was 8 years old. He should have been totally independent, but he had a baby sister who died, and Flo, I suppose, took Flint back, who was then 5 years old, as though he was an infant. He couldn't suckle because she didn't have milk anymore. She'd been very sick, but she let him ride her back until she could no longer walk with him. She fell over. And, you know, when he would pester her for grooming, one day he was so insistent, she was up in a low nest, he pulled her out of the nest onto the ground because he was pulling her hand so that she'd groom him. And when she died, he lasted 3 weeks. And I think he died of a broken heart. He died of grief. And I watched, and she had made a big nest, and they'd slept in it 3 nights before. And he climbed very, very, very slowly up that tree, and he walked along the branch, and he looked at this nest. And he stayed there for about a minute, just looking at the nest. And then very slowly he climbed back down, curled up on the ground, and that was it. But then, of course, I've suffered grief with the loss of a husband. And it's a numbing feeling. And either you give in to it, or you say, well, I can't give in to it because there's no point. I've got to control this and somehow make my life worthy of the person I'm grieving for.
That's really beautifully said. What is your most memorable scientific moment?
Well, obviously seeing David Greybeard use a tool, I mean, that was kind of magic because...
So describe it for us.
Well, okay, it was, you know, the chimps were still mostly running away from me, and it had been raining, and I was wet and cold. And you know, my mother was there for the first 4 months because the British authorities, it was British controlled back then, they wouldn't let a young girl on her own go out in the forest. They said it was ridiculous. But in the end, they said, oh, as long as she comes with another European woman. Anyway, she'd just gone. So I was really feeling a bit sad and depressed. And suddenly I saw this black shape hunched over a termite mound, you know, that beautiful golden color. And I wasn't terribly close, probably as close as Mary at the end of the front row, something like that. Anyway, I was looking through my binoculars, and I saw this black hand reach out and break off a grass stem and push it down into a hole in this termite mound and pull it slowly out, balance the end on the wrist, and bite off the termites that were clinging on. And the reason that was so exciting back then is because it was believed that humans and only humans used and made tools. And we were defined as man, mind you, man, not humans, man, the tool maker. And so that was what involved the National Geographic Society. And I have to say that even on my notes here, the Geographic is mentioned as the organization to be thankful for. Here it is, National Geographic, because, you know, it's, I just forgot it, but, you know, it was the National Geographic that came in because of the tool using. And then that first article that appeared in 1963, and then the first film, and then followed by another article, that took Jane and the Chimps around the world. And I don't know if it could be true that the Geographic really liked this idea when Leakey proposed it, because you have the, you know, the black ape, and you have this young girl. I wasn't exactly bad looking, was I, back then?
No, you were very, very pretty.
Still are.
Long, long legs, still are.
The legs, you see. Now, there, if that happened today, if somebody dared to say, you know, Jane's on the cover of Geographic because of her legs, there'd be a sort of horrible lawsuit. But back then, you know, I thought, well, if my legs is giving me money to study the chimps, thank you.
And on that note, there couldn't be a more fun and important note to end on. Jane Goodall, Heather Templeton, gentlemen, thank you so much. It's been a lovely, lovely evening.
And all of them.
And everybody. Thank you.
Christiane, for
Thanks.
being with us this evening. I want to, we're going to do a little bit of pictures up here, and I asked the audience if you would stay in your seats until we've taken some pictures, and Jane has had the opportunity.
Do I still have to be isolated? I feel as though I've got leprosy or something.
Well, you are going to stand up and join all of us on stage.
May I join you?
Yes, you will join us. We'll take a few pictures. And then if you would wait until Jane exits before leaving your seats. Thank you all for coming to be with us this evening. Thank you, Christiane, Andrew, and Mike. Delighted to have you here in this exciting project. And most of all, Jane, thank you for inspiring us and for always living a life of purpose that I think inspires all of us to live our own lives of purpose in service to others. Thank you.
Thank you.